Well, just like that, the Cricket Unfiltered off season is over. We are back. I'm Menners. I'm joined by my co-host Paul Dennett. Paul, how are you?
Good, man. It's great to be back. Seems like since we left, the international game is under jeopardy. One day cricket's about to end. I think the cricket world needs us back.
Yes, as I've titled this episode, "Cricket at the Crossroads," because
Indeed.
it feels like cricket's on the brink of something big. So, because of such enormous topics, I gave Jaleesa the week off. No, just joking. she was busy. Just joking. And Bharat Sundaresan, was with longer hair than Jaleesa, is stepping in. Bharat, how are you?
I'm very good, Manners. Hello, Paul. I basically don't lie. You just wanted someone with hair on the show, so that's the only
Exactly.
reason I'm back. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's no point getting Gav on a show like this.
Yeah, 1 out of 3 ain't bad.
Pretty
with hair.
much. I'm just filling in for Jalissa with the hair.
Yeah, she was invited. I was only being facetious, but a lot to talk about. I mean, in this episode, we're going to cover off a bit of news that has gone on since we took a break. Then I feel like the Big Bash is almost up against a wall now with the guns ready to just kill it. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about ODI cricket. But look, since our last show, we saw another Aussie collapse in the subcontinent. So last time we recorded the show, Australia had steamrolled Sri Lanka in the first test, and I was cock a hoop. Bharat, you were there. What happened in that second test?
A lot, Manners, and yeah, you took me back to Sri Lanka. It's been nearly 3 weeks since I've come back from there. So what have you guys been up to in these last few weeks? Is this you've been on vacation, is it? Or
Yep, I was on holiday in the States, living it up. Went to Fenway Park. Paul was working hard, no doubt.
Yeah, I think it was the break was initiated by Menners after since 2013. You've basically done a show every week for 9 years with barely a break. So it was time to have a bit of a freshen up.
Absolutely.
Okay, basically give the listeners a break. But no, coming to your question, Manners. Look, it was a pretty crazy test match just to be there in Gaul after what had happened in the first test, and in the back with everything that was happening in the backdrop, and especially on day 2 is when things started turning around, both on and off the field for Sri Lanka as a country. I believe things have, of course, gone back to how it was since I've come back, but just the way the protests kind of reached the gates of the Gaul Stadium, it wasn't even supposed to happen that day. Cricket had been kept separate to the political situation and the economic crisis happening in Sri Lanka till that point. And it's pretty interesting how these things work out. It's literally around the time that the Sri Lankans, the people of Gaul, started taking over their fort. They were not allowed to go on top of that fort during the first test because the Sri Lankan government was worried that if you saw protesters on TV around the world, it's not a great look. So you wouldn't have seen the revolution if you're following the cricket on TV. The cameras never showed you any of that for obvious reasons. So just being there, on commentary, talking about this late order collapse on day 2, when Australia were in a position to really put a massive first innings score on the board, but they couldn't. That turnaround happened pretty much around the same time that things started looking up for Sri Lankans. The president fled and all that was happening, and that's the day Kusal Mendis and Dimuth Karunaratne put up that partnership. And next day, as Sri Lanka rejoiced, as people are jumping into the president's pool and watching the cricket on his television or in Colombo, Dinesh Chandimal just played one of the great innings in Test history. And you almost felt like after Australia had been out there for 180 overs, you saw a collapse coming, and they were gone. It was humid, it was hot. It was the end of a pretty long tour for a lot of them. They just looked shot, and Prabhat Jayasuriya on debut bowling beautifully using the drift. It was just wonderful to watch. And I said this on commentary back then, and I put it in my piece as well. It was as good a turnaround as India winning in Melbourne after 36 all out in Adelaide. It's just because it's not India, it didn't have that kind of hype. But to come back from the way Sri Lanka were humbled in that first test, and for 22 overs they were bowled out, the second innings, to come back and win the way they did by a bigger margin, if you think about it, an innings defeat, says a lot about Sri Lanka as a country and their team.
Yeah, it was kind of, from an Australian perspective, it was kind of all of that progress that had been made in Pakistan and then the first Test match, and the feeling of this is the new dawn of success in Asia, and then this was like the carbon copy of what had happened so many times in the past. Australia batted well in the first innings. They just didn't make the massive runs that needed to be made. I really think that the lack of Ashton Agar really made a significant loss. That it's only dawned on me in recent years, just that we need a left-arm orthodox factory in this country. That the government should be going around anyone who's left-handed at age 5 or 6. They should be taken to a special commune and seen if they really can start to do it, because it's just a magical way of bowling in the subcontinent. And I think that Swepson, he had figures of average 24 for the series. So you can't really say he didn't bowl well. But I think I'd be going in a different direction for India, just because he didn't look overly threatening. And I think if Agar's injury, all his injury concerns are behind him, I think he shapes as the bowler I want in the side for the Indian tour.
George Bailey just kind of dangled Glenn Maxwell in front of us, didn't he? And, tantalizingly close to playing. But, instead they persisted with Travis Head for the second test. And my only hope is that we learn our lesson heading to India next year, that really you can't carry anyone. If Head's not looking good on those type of pitches, you've got to make the tough call. In
20 years from now, Max will be a commentator one day, and suddenly the Australian plane will be delayed, and they're suddenly saying, we might have to put Glenn Maxwell on the side. And I'll be saying, finally. Then at the last minute, actually, no. Sean Marsh has wandered by, and they've picked him instead because he's also doing some commentary.
The only time Glenn Maxwell really lost his smile on that tour was the morning of that second test. I felt really bad for him. I bumped into him quite a bit during the one-dayers. I remember speaking to him right after the last ODI, when people had come dressed in yellow and they were screaming, "Thank you, Australia." In the midst of all that, he spoke to Louis Cameron and I, and he was just so happy. He was just so happy to be back in the test side, to get a new baggy green, of course. I saw pictures and videos of his baggy green destroyed. It's quite bizarre what's happened to that old baggy green of his. And it looked like he was shaping up to play that second test. Leading into that second test, you saw him in practice. There was that, he had that spring in his stride. And then it all just was taken away from him. I remember him walking towards the net that morning with 45 minutes left or half an hour left for the toss. And he just saw it on his face. For the first time, he didn't walk towards the couple of us who were standing there to say hello. He just walked kind of away from us into the net. And you could. I even posted a little clip of him on Twitter that morning. He was just throwing balls at this at the net just all by himself. So I think it hit him hard. I think that's the closest he's come back to a test recall. But you're right. He should be part of. He will be part of the squad to India. They've kept him as that, like you said, Paul. That's contingency. If in case something happens, break the glass and bring Glenn Maxwell out.
Yeah, and regular listeners to this show know that I'd have him as captain, opening batsman, opening bowler, and wicketkeeper in every single test match that we play. But in all seriousness, I always do say it. It's going to go down as a real sadness if he only ends up playing a handful of test matches and never gets the chance to play a test match at home. If he'd been born in New Zealand, he might have played 100 test matches by now and have a glittering, sparkling record. I think, and I agree, Menners, that Travis Head doesn't look like the answer, even though he did bowl very well in the first test. Runs in Australia don't necessarily equate to runs in the subcontinent. The only thing I'll say is that if they are convinced that what he's showing in the nets, that he has worked it out, the sample size it's getting enough that I wouldn't pick him. But I still don't think it has to be a choice. I think that they should have found a way to get Maxwell in there anyway. And I know that Stark bowled really well, but I just do think that when you've got two fast bowlers plus Cameron Green on a wicket that is the second most favourable to spinners on the planet, I always look at the opposite. You would never go to the whacker of in its heyday of the 1980s, packed full with spinners. You just wouldn't do it. We shouldn't do it in reverse, and we need to be able to be brutal about that in India. That if others have made the point, they dropped Hazelwood without any compunction. They can do it. He's one of the best bowlers that we've got. So if they can drop him without any hesitation, surely they can go the next step and drop another one, or even drop both. And there's nothing wrong with having Cameron Green and Nathan Lyon opening the bowling. If it's a real raging turner, as marvellous as those cricketers are, if they're not going to be able to perform because of the conditions, then you've got to choose accordingly.
I mean, in Stark's defense, though, Paul, and I completely agree with you. I, in fact, thought that was a great formula that Australia can fall back on if they need it, whether it's in Sri Lanka or looking forward to India, using Cam Green as that second seamer and playing with three spinners, or having Maxwell as that third spinning all-rounder. But I think they left it till the last morning, and the surface was a lot different to the surface that they used for the first test. It wasn't crumbly; it was pretty firm, and I think they just went with the safer option. And I thought Mitchell Stark bowled pretty well, and that there's not that there were any doubts about him doing well if the ball reverses or even otherwise. I mean, he has such a great record in Sri Lanka and in the subcontinent. But yeah, I think eventually it came down to that last 15 minutes, which kind of tells you why Glenn Maxwell maybe was so hopeful going into that, when he woke up that morning and it wasn't to be. But the only problem for Australia now is when it comes to who do they pick, or do you stick with Travis Head? There's no cricket in the subcontinent for either their senior team or the A side. I think from what I know, I don't think there's a tour in the subcontinent between now and that India tour. I think Australia A might be going to New Zealand, and they might be playing games at home. So what do you who do you or on what basis do you pick batters, especially for that India tour, on how they've gone in the subcontinent? I mean, what if Travis Head now has another incredible summer? Like, do you leave him out and say, no, you didn't get runs 8 months ago? So that's the tricky part about, this whole horses for courses thing, because that tour is so far away. I think between Pakistan and Sri Lanka was just 2 months. But now you're talking 8 months from the end of that Sri Lanka tour. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Part of the problem has always been that when you're dropped from the side as a batter, it's a sort of a seismic moment and you might never come back.
Yeah.
If they make the decision, and I think they should, that Travis Head is not the answer for the subcontinent, and he comes out this summer and scores a mountain of runs, it's perfectly fine to say to him, look, we're not going to pick you for India, but you're going to be very much in our calculations for the next time that we play in Australia. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I know it's crazy, but there's nothing wrong with Pat Cummins on the morning saying, well, you know what? Mitch Stark gets some good reverse swing. I think Glenn Maxwell's a better option than me in the side. And I'm going to stand down for a test match and have someone else captain the side as an example of a wonderful leader.
Horses for courses, maybe David Warner spot in the side might be under, there might be a few question marks, especially about him overseas now. So, yeah, if Travis Head's
it's going to be really interesting. I think they'll still pick him for India, and I still would. But then what happens after that? Does he get picked for England, and what does he do in England? Because if he were to fail in England, I know we're sort of casting the line a long way down, then I think that might really draw a line in the sand for his overseas test match situation. But anyway, that's something to look forward to, that Ashes tour already.
So anyway, that series ended up 1-1. Good to see Smith and Labuschagne get centuries in that last test match. Smith broke that long drought. Barrett, what was it like being there when Smith made a ton again?
Yeah, I mean, I had so many intros pending to write on Steve Smith. As you know, I have watched a lot of Steve Smith. I think at times I wish I hadn't seen so much of him. I'm just kidding. But I do at times wake up at night imagining myself watching Steve Smith bat in the net and, playing umpire to his net sessions, because that's what I end up doing. I'm often the guy who decides whether he's out or not. If the bowler thinks he's Steve Smith's out or not, it doesn't matter to Steve Smith. If I say you're out, he trusts me with that. So it was good to see him go on and then score that 100. Look, he was batting. I thought he batted really well in Pakistan as well. The only thing missing, and I interviewed him just before this Sri Lanka Test series in Gaul, and he spoke about that. He felt that the only thing missing from his batting in Pakistan was maybe he could have attacked the spinners a lot more, which is what he did. during this series, and he just looked in such good nick going into the Test series, and that really explains his reaction. And I'm sure you guys have spoken a lot about it after that run out in the first Test. It was almost like all this hard work for nothing, because it's just a 2-test series. It's a very good there was a possibility that he would have not got much of a bat in the second Test, after having seen how that first Test went. So I think that's where the disappointment came through. But he was really, really looking good in the net, and he'd figured a way out to handle the Sri Lankan spinners, because he had Rangana Herath in his mind, even though Rangana Herath is long retired, and he planned for the left-arm spinner, used Daniel Vittori a lot in the net. So he was, he knew he was going to score big runs. It's just a question of whether he would get to that 100, which for some reason had evaded him. And I know he's spoken in other interviews as well about how he thinks that him occupying the crease has helped other batters, who batted after him or alongside him. And look, and he was honest in that interview as well. The Manas Labuschagne story in the last 3 years has impacted his batting, because he's suddenly not coming out to bat when Australia are in trouble. The first time he got to do it in a long time in this series, he makes a big score. So no surprises with that. And he said that in that interview he gave to me. He said, I don't know what it is about me in a crisis. I wish I could bottle it up and carry it with me wherever I go, but it just doesn't happen. Like, when I walk out to bat, when Australia are already in a good position, it just seems different. So, it was good to see him get there and score runs. But look, that's where I thought the lower order failed him on that second morning. He had a lot of runs left in him. He could have easily got to 180, 190, maybe even further. But I think the lower order didn't support him well enough, and that's where Australia left Sri Lanka to come back, and it kind of bit them in the back at the end.
Maybe we need to have you on the side, Barrett. You could be the professional non-striker, and you can be the one that tells Smith, actually, no, you are out. Don't challenge. Please walk off.
No, he's not seen. I actually said it to him, Paul, funnily enough, when we were just about to start our interview. I was like, it's kind of weird facing you, because generally it's the other way around, right? Like, maybe you should turn around and sit in an interview and you talk to me when when your back's turned to me. That's the position we are used to. Okay, it sounds very wrong, but that's what it is.
Barrett's Smith's net stalker. All right, so I want to move on to some good news before we get to some bad news. What about this deal that Cricket Australia did with Disney Star? So Disney Star can broadcast cricket from Australia for the next 7 years for a total of $250 million US. So there may be some areas of Australian cricket that's losing value every day, but that's a pretty big paycheck, Paul.
Yeah, but it also just shows how much India dominate the world. That it's like this is the spare change they've got found behind the lounge that they've chucked our direction. We're like, thank you so much. It's kind of funny because Cricket Australia, I'm sure they'd love to be able to say to Channel 7, look, we don't care what you do now. We've got this other money. But then they also don't want to be too beholden to India, where we might suddenly find that India come out here every summer, which, look, I'm not going to complain if they do. It's probably not the right thing, but I'd find it very entertaining.
Well, I mean, the good news is now that Australia will be playing India in 5-match test series from now on. So that deal, I think there's 2 of those series and 2 Ashes in that 7 years. So that's pretty good value for Disney Star there. Barrett, what do you think of the deal? What does it mean for Australian cricket?
Oh, look, I as growing up, I watched Australian cricket on Star back in India. And that's when we used to get a lot of domestic cricket as well. Not all the Shield games, but we got all your one-day tournaments, Pura Milk Cup or whatever it was called back in the day. So that's where I watched a young Nathan Bracken and the young Shane Watson.
So we got... Sorry.
No.
Is that where you get the hair from, Nathan Bracken?
I think I have better hair than Nathan Bracken. Maybe not better
Debatable.
hair than Jalissa, but no, actually, you know what? Yeah, he had really thick hair. I was a big fan of Nathan Bracken once he grew his hair out. But and I remember seeing him before he did that. Like, when he was a very young, fresh-looking guy bowling for taking the new ball for New South Wales. And so I grew up watching cricket or Australian cricket on Star. It was only, I think, 5 years ago when Sony took over, and it came at a time where Disney Star, or Star as they were called at that point, was really focused on getting that IPL deal, and they kind of felt. I remember interviewing the then Star CEO, Uday Shankar, who's then moved on to Viacom 18. About products like cricket from England and cricket from Australia. At that point, they felt that they were niche products. You weren't getting the same kind of numbers, and they were really focused on getting the IPL. Now that especially as Dan Breddick wrote in his piece as well, the last India series, just the way it took the Indian audiences by storm, winning at Gabba, Rishabh Pant, and all that. It just tells you that at some level, the India-Australia rivalry is on par with the Ashes, at least for any non-Australian, non-English viewer watching, even a neutral. So I think that's one of the reasons why they pumped in a lot of money into Australian cricket. And because Star's back, you saw whether it's the BBL or whether it's domestic cricket, everything will be broadcast back there. And like Paul said, look, whatever cricket goes on anywhere in the world, Manners, more Indians watch it than even Australians. I mean, you look at the numbers. I mean, I get calls from people, friends back home, who want to know about some off spinner who plays for Sussex or some wrist spinner who plays for Essex, who I've never heard of. I quickly Google it, and they're not looking, and I just bluff my way through. So they just watch everything that happens. I was one of those people, growing up, like I said. I knew all about who used to play for New South Wales, Richard Cheekwe to all of them. I remember watching
Corey
Gavin
Richards.
Robertson before he even came to India and played in that 1998 Test. So it's a pretty sad life, but it's so. And this is back then. Now with the internet and all that, it's just a fact of life. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about it as the show goes on. The influence of Indian cricket, and not so much just Indian cricket, but just the Indian cricket audience as well.
Well, let's get stuck into it. I mean, that was kind of like just an entree. Now the main course. I've been enjoying my break, but also been racked with worry and a furrowed brow about what is happening with cricket. And the big thing for me now, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but the Big Bash is in so much trouble. These two competitions that have come along, the UAE League and the league in South Africa, with all their money that the IPL clubs are going to put into it and all the private backing, I just think the Big Bash now is facing a future where it's relegated to being a second or third level T20 competition. Its value will be significantly diminished when the next TV rights comes up, because we won't be getting the star players. And, I think a lot of it's going to come down to what does Cricket Australia do with David Warner? Do they let him go? If they let him go, then, others will follow. All of them will follow. Even players like Ben Cutting, Tim David, they're all going to get paid double to leave the Big Bash. So am I right to be worried?
Oh, yeah, you should be really worried. And, unfortunately, the Big Bash League has already come. It hasn't been a top tier T20 franchise tournament. And I'm talking as a neutral, speaking to people who watch a lot of cricket overseas. It's just not the same, because at the end of the day, you need some star power. I'm not saying there's no star power in the BBL, but when you don't have the top international players playing, when you don't have your own top players playing, David Warner's played 3 games in the 12 years of the BBL or whatever it is. Mitchell Starc hasn't played much. Josh Hazelwood hasn't played much. Pat Cummins hasn't played much of it. Yes, you have Maxwell and Stoinis and a few of them who played a lot of Big Bash cricket, but it doesn't have the pull that some of these other leagues who have already existed have had. And that's one of the main reasons, Manners, both the South African board and the people in charge of the UAE board have targeted January. By now, if say, and I'm all for privatization. Look, I haven't understood the Australian market as well as maybe a lot of you who grown up here do. But I've always asked this question: why hasn't the BBL been privatized? And Usman Khawaja took the opportunity during a random press conference in Gaul to talk about it. Dan asked him about the BBL, and he said it should be privatized. And I think, and going back to what I was saying, the reason why South Africa and UAE have been able to like capture January, early February, is because the Big Bash League didn't stamp it down and make it their own. If they had done it like 5 years ago through whatever way, whether it was privatization or whether it was getting money from somewhere else and almost incentivizing all these big names to come here and to keep the Big Bash League where it was when it started. Like, going back to me watching Australian domestic cricket in India 10 years ago when the Big Bash League started to become a thing, it was a rage. A lot of people in India used to watch it. It was almost like a precursor to the IPL, which would start in April as a T20 tournament. But now with the Bangladesh Premier League was the first one which identified the weakness in that sense in the BBL and made the most of it. That's where you saw a lot of international players going to Bangladesh. I mean, people always point out the IPL and think that the IPL is taking everyone away, but the IPL doesn't happen. There's no direct clash between the IPL and BBL, or there wasn't till this point. And now what's happening is what every IPL team owner I've ever spoken to or I've ever heard talking has wanted. I mean, going back 5-6 years, I remember them talking about expanding the IPL in a way, and the analogy that was always used was, look, what's the point of having this really niche, exquisite shop which is open for 2 months, and then you tell your consumers, you know what, now it's shut for 10 months, now you come back next April and we'll open it up for you. So they always use that analogy as a means to expand it. And you can only expand the IPL itself that much. Cricket's not soccer at the end of the day. So the only other way to do it is to start these other leagues or help start these other leagues elsewhere and just extend your brand. And that's seriously what's happening right now. And, the Big Bash League, as a result, Manners, like you said, is being pushed further and further behind. Like, it'll still be like a marquee product for an Australian audience, I guess. But, and if I was a young Australian cricketer, I would maybe even use the BBL as a chance to go and make or use it as a platform, because there are scouts all around the world who watch the BBL, to get into all these other leagues where I'll get paid a lot more. Tim David is a great example. And then and I don't see the whole old format where playing for your country should come first. Stay in that sense. I mean, look, Tim David will play for Australia, but he would have decided when he wants to play for Australia because he's just that valuable as a cricketer. We've read about how he has a very good chance of getting into the World Cup squad. And what if he does do that and wins Australia the World Cup? Then the whole traditional route of, the baggy green and Australia before anything else, before myself, it has to come under question. Look, I'm all for change. The world is changing, and so should we.
I think that's the thing, that the world has changed so massively in such a short space of time. I think it's caught the Big Bash, the cricket administrators on the hop, because when they brought it in, the notion was cricket was no longer as popular in Australia as it had once been for young kids. And the whole thing was, let's get a fast, fun, breezy tournament that is just great for summertime fun, family friendly, and make it, jazz it up and take advantage of the blueprint that the IPL has offered, put an Australian spin on it, and away we go. And it was always intended to be a domestic tournament which would not include the top Australian stars, and that if it got a few stars from overseas, fantastic. But, there you go. I remember when we talked to, Menas, you'll remember his name. I've forgotten his name.
The head of the Big Bash at the time. I can't remember his name.
He was fantastic. And he was sort of saying that, I said to him, he's sad.
Go on.
I've got it on the tip of my tongue. I should have. But anyway, he was saying that they're actually almost happy that India weren't allowing their players to come, because it was kind of nice to have a product that for once wasn't beholden to India, that it could be their own thing. And I think that was all perfect. But now, bing, bang, bang, the world has changed so much that Australian fans now see that, when you look at the IPL or the CPL, the star power is absolutely enormous. The Big Bash does look second rate in comparison to it. But I think there's an opportunity for them to respond. And one of the responses would be, we didn't bring this Big Bash about to make money. We brought it, we sort of knew it was going to be a bit of a loss leader. And it can continue to be that. Maybe we just need to say, right, we're going to have to open the coffers up a bit more and now make it financially viable for these players to actually want to stay here. And I don't know if it would be financially too hard to do. They'd cop a bit of a hit, but they're making all this extra money with the Indian TV deal. Maybe they could say, whatever you're going to earn playing in South Africa or Bangladesh or the UAE League, you can earn that same or something roughly similar to that playing in Australia, and then get everyone around. But the other thing is going to be difficult is getting the Australian players to play. Even the window that now is going to be open potentially after the Sydney Test match, a lot of the players aren't going to want to play in it, particularly those who are going to go on the Tour of India. That we've got this Tour of India that we are going to regard as really, really vital. 2017, we had the best preparation in a long time because everyone went to the UAE, they played and played and played. It's going to be very hard to do that and also get them to play in the Big Bash. Something's got to give.
I mean, there's a lot at stake here. Here's why I think it's such a big thing. So the Big Bash itself now is going to be set back, and its value will decrease. So the next TV deal, it won't get the hundreds of millions it got last time. It'll get a fraction of that. But also, what are Australian summers going to be like when all the best players, jet off overseas to play in the leagues overseas, and no one's left here apart from maybe the test team until early January? Because now there'll be this temptation from players to get through the system, get to your early 20s, you're almost the finished product. And then if the T20 leagues picked you up, well, bang, you're off. And you look at some of the figures, like the UAE league, their cap per team, their salary cap is $2.5 million per team, and the top players will get $450,000. I mean, in Aussie dollars, the team total cap is 1.9 million. So already they're dwarfing the salary cap in Australia. So 1.9 million Aussie dollars in Australia. So yeah, I just think there's a lot at stake, and I'm worried about in a couple of years, what will the summers look like in Australia?
I don't think privatisation is necessarily the answer. I think it should be considered, but they do realise that as soon as they privatise, then they lose that control, and it's going to be all for money and whatever else. I think the answer has got to be they have to be willing to spend a bit more money so that they can sort of say to players, you are going to have to stay in Australia in December and January, but we're going to make it worth your while. And with a combination of extra money and basically to those that they can still enforce it, we are your employer, then make that happen. I know with people like Tim David, it'll be more difficult to do, but I'm sure that they can find a balance if they're willing to spend the money.
But there's another change coming, though, Paul. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know if you guys read Tim Wigmore's piece where he's spoken to Venki Mysore, who's been the CEO of the Knight Riders. We can't even call them just the Kolkata Knight Riders anymore. They are the Trinbago Knight Riders. I think they own a team in the US League, and I don't know where else. Maybe the UAE as well. And there's been, I'm sure you guys have heard about it as well. There's been talk of it for a while now, going completely the soccer way, where players are not contracted anymore. And it's not going to happen this year, but in the next 5-10 years, players are not contracted by their respective countries or boards of their own countries, except maybe the BCCI. But they are contracted with these franchises who have leagues everywhere. And like it happens in soccer, it doesn't mean the end of international cricket. That's never going to happen. But it means, what it would mean is they get to, then come, and in soccer they go and play friendlies, or like what we were talking about, Menas, earlier before the show started. The EPL takes a break, and then the Football World Cup happens in Qatar. Similarly, players are released to go play the Ashes or these marquee series, or go and play World Cups or all these other tournaments, or any bilaterals which matter. And that, I think, is the future. You can't avoid it. It's just sport is a business. And I see one of our comments from one of our friends, Aviru Banerjee, saying Cricket Australia can stop players, but they can only stop them till a point. You can't really antagonize them to an extent either, where tomorrow if David Warner leaves and you put him under so much pressure that he say you have to stay, he's not going to stay. That's what India has done in the last 5 or 10 years, for rightly or wrongly. But what they've done is they've really given players, not just their own players, but players around the world. In fact, in some cases, players around the world more power than their own players to make decisions which kind of suit their own families. I think that's where
that's right. I mean, the players won't want national contracts. They'll be able to make more money being a free agent. That's why I think Australian summers are going to be in jeopardy, because players will be offered state contracts and they might go, actually, you know what? I actually want to be free in January, February, and want to be playing. And we're going to see, a lot of talent sort of float away from Australian cricket, because despite the threats, we still produce a lot of, excellent T20 cricketers at all levels. It'll be snapped up. So it is very scary about what could happen to the Big Bash, to the Australian team. And I mean, Paul, what do you think of, if in 5 or 10 years, international cricket is sort of just relegated to sort of gaps in the T20 schedule? I mean, how does that thought make you feel?
Well, I'd be very disappointed if it got to that level, but I think it's inevitable that it's going to head in that direction. But where does it end up? If it ends up right to that extreme where, the Knight Riders have refused to release Steve Smith for the upcoming Test match against New Zealand because they think it's not important enough, and Steve Smith has reluctantly agreed he's going to stay in South Africa and play for his Knight Riders franchise. If it got to that level, then I'd be really, really disappointed. If it got some of the way there, and we haven't yet talked about the potential demise of one-day international cricket, if one-day international cricket went to the way that Shane Warne has said that it should be just the World Cup and not played, and that gave up freed up a bit of space in the international calendar for a few more of these leagues. But then I like the fact that the TV deal was based on what the Indians liked that they saw at the Gabba. That I think that cricket still needs to realise that is a real separator that it has from other sports. And for as much as I like all sports and I enjoy soccer, but for me, when Chelsea's playing Manchester United, the fact that not a single person's born is from Chelsea or from Manchester, that concept way, way gone. That and you have that same concept in the T20 leagues. Very few are actually representing the areas they're from. When it's Australia versus India, it's 11 Australians versus 11 Indians. For me, that still has resonance and it means more. And I wonder whether, in as much as there's a desire to have this sort of league system that you talked about, I wonder whether the fans eventually would regard it, they would get a little bit sick of it. That they'd think, all right, I really like the IPL, but am I all that interested in it? Even though my team has a franchise in South Africa, they might actually crave a little bit more of the stuff that's been around all this time. So hopefully they can get the balance right.
Now, what I just coming to what you said, Paul, I don't think international cricket is going to change to that dramatic an extent. All I was trying to say is players will have more choices. I think the Ashes will happen. Part of the broadcast deal is that they've not taken away 2 test matches from the India-Australia series and said, we're going to play 3 T20s instead, which was the fear. If you thought, even going back 5 years, people thought, T20 is going to kill test cricket. That's not going to happen. They've in fact added another test match. I think there will still be a lot of international cricket, but there'll also be a lot of league cricket. And I think it'll be up to the players. And I don't see I don't think that it's a big issue. It should be the case. Why shouldn't players have opportunities or choices to make, right? I mean, whether it's a David Warner today or 6 years from now, it's someone who's 18 today, who's 24 at that point. Why shouldn't he or she, for that matter, and it's happening in women's cricket as well, why shouldn't they have a choice to say, you know what, I feel like playing this. I want to do this. Or, what, I want to do everything. I think what we are going to see is players have a bigger say on their own careers, because the whole traditional format of the, you had 2 options. You either played for your country or even going back 5 years, when you either could play for your country or you were a rebel or like a renegade, as, the Chris Gales and the Kyron Pollards were called 10 years ago. I think that's going to end, where if a player wants to be a freelancer, he or she isn't looked at as being, as being a blasphemer. If and everybody's family situation, everything needs to come into consideration.
Of course, right? And I agree. It's great for the cricketers, but it is a big issue because we're seeing the game transform, in front of us. And what is it going to be? And you talk about Australia, India, and Australia, England, and all the big Test series. But are we going to see a situation where the smaller nations play a lot less international cricket because there's just your smaller windows. A lot of their players are earning more. And therefore, it just gets chiseled down to sort of marquee series, and we lose a bit of sort of the romance of Test cricket, where there's only a few teams playing.
I'm naive enough to think that's not going to happen. That they can still have, all right, in December and January, Australian Test summer. In June, July, or whatever it is, the England Test summer. India will have their own Test summer, wherever they choose to have that, whether it's March or at a different time of the year. And then, so I suppose when the Ashes is on, that's when New Zealand can play Sri Lanka. When those series are on, and then there has to be just a little bit of time for Australia and India and England to play those series against other nations. And if it ends up being 2 Test match series that they knock over in the space of 13 days, and then it's done and dusted, well, it's not too bad. This last series against Sri Lanka, I would have loved a 3rd Test match, but I suppose it was always unsustainable for cricket to continue with all these games that didn't really matter to people, and that windswept games between New Zealand and Bangladesh that are getting very, very few people watching, or the endless cavalcade of bilateral 50-over games, or even T20 games. Some of those did have to get squeezed down. So I just hope that the Indian administrators realise that it's in everyone's best interests for Test cricket to be not marginalised. And I agree with you, Barry. It's obviously not going to go. Test cricket's not going to die, but it can really, if handled properly, then the T20 leagues could be the greatest thing for the Test game. That it could all settle down quite nicely, and our summers might not have to look too different than they are currently, Minners.
And just like so sorry to interject,
No.
but what the one thing that Indian cricket administrators or Indian cricket has done well, better than the other two, the big 3 countries, if you want to call them that, is they actually tour more than Australia and England. They've gone to Zimbabwe. They're going to Zimbabwe next month, or maybe later this month in August, and that would be, like, if I'm not mistaken, their 5th tour in the last 8 years. Where, Australia or England haven't done that. They go everywhere. They go to the West Indies more often than Australia. When was the last time Australia went and played a Test series in the West Indies? I mean, India do that, and they that's where they win over the rest of the cricket world as well. At an administrative level, because when India go, it brings money. I mean, just think back to 2 years. There was talk of Cricket Australia going bankrupt if India didn't come in 2020. They did, and everything worked out eventually. Yeah. Maybe those claims were exaggerated. Who knows? So I think that's where what Indian cricket does is not just keep their own players happy, not just the players happy, but they make sure that at the ICC level, and if Saurav Ganguly does become the next ICC chairman, then it's just the power rests in one hand in a way, but they also make sure that the money is spread out a lot more, and that's what they've done ever since they came into power 10-15 years ago.
I suppose my exhortation to India to do the right thing wasn't necessarily an implicit criticism of them, because I agree, Australia has been shameful in the way that we have lacked, not toured in various countries for years and years and years. I suppose it's more just they are the ones who are going to decide. So I hope that they make the right decisions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I said was they've made the right decisions in that sense, of keeping everyone happy. But at the end of the day, they'll do whatever is good for business. But that's what they've done ever since they've come into power, like I said, 10-15 years ago. So tomorrow, if Sri Lanka and New Zealand never play a 3-match Test series, and at some level, like I said, it does get decided in a way by these broadcast rights and everyone else, that'll happen because it's good for business, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
All right, Barrett, quick question, very quick answer. So you're Nick Hockley. You've got David Warner's form in front of you. Do you sign off and let him go to play in the UAE?
Absolutely.
Yes or no?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
Paul?
absolutely. Yeah.
Paul, same question. Because once you let him go, then you have to let them all go, don't you? You can't just let him go. So you're sort of saying, all right.
I think that unless they were willing to overturn the ban on the captaincy, and unless they were willing to say, hey, David, we want you to stay, and we are going to create a level above platinum, sapphire, and you're that level, and you're going to get $2 million to play in the Big Bash. And as much as you're right, man, as it starts to create a precedent, I think if they say no, that's probably neither situation is a great outcome for them. But I think if they say no, they're going to have an even worse outcome.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so then do you think in the coming weeks we'll see, okay, so Stoinis form on front of Nick Hockley's desk, he wants to go because he can get, $500,000 US. Glenn Maxwell, same. Will these forms just pile up? So, when we thought the Big Bash in January would have Australia's best white ball players, in fact, it's not going to happen.
Well, if it does do that, then they've got to say, we've got to rise to the challenge and straight away be agile and realize that now's the time to act, or at the very least for the next the year after this is time to act. They're playing with the big boys. They've got to be willing to do what's needed.
All right. Well, I think we'll see, halfway through the big, because, the Big Bash will be faced with a situation where a lot of the best players will, leave the Big Bash. They'll be, we'll have all this wonderful international draft, but no one will read the fine print that, we've drafted so-and-so, he's leaving at the 7th game. So, he won't be around for the back half of the competition in the final. So a huge challenge for the Big Bash. Way. Cricket Christmas Day and put Big Bash. Now, for those who aren't aware, the National Basketball has put a fixture on Christmas Day. So Australian cricket's been gazumped again. I mean, this is a tragedy, a travesty. It's a huge oversight. This could have been, Big Bash is craving for these type of marquee events, and it just lets the players just whine about playing on Christmas Day. I mean, where are the kahunas on Australian cricket to make this happen? Where are the people that get things done?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Manners, but I do agree with you, but I don't think anyone can match your passion for it. Your Christmases must really suck.
They really do. I mean, Barrett, you're a man of the world. The sport is played on Christmas Day all around the world. In America, it's a huge day. What's Australian cricket doing now? The National Basketball League is going to now be. We're all going to be there on Christmas night watching, some basketball team I've never heard of play another one because there's nothing else to watch. Cricket could have had that.
You start reading up on the National Basketball League, Menace. I have watched a few of those games, and it's quite exciting, I must say. But hey, I always thought Christmas is when you got drunk and you woke up on Boxing Day with a hangover, right, Paul? That's what I was told Christmases are for.
That is Australia. Christmas, yes. But I think I agree with Menace that like a lot of family gatherings at about 3:30, people start to nod off because they've had one too many helpings for lunch and one too many beers. But I think that if they could market it as a big thing that, 4 o'clock or something like that it came on the television, I think it would rate really well. And he's right that the NBL is cricket's getting attacked from all quarters. The NBL with the NBA backing and all of the, basketball is always it's a much easier sell for young kids to play basketball than it is to play cricket. So anytime the NBL does something, it's tiny compared to cricket at the moment, but give it a few years, it's catching up. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mad Manners about that one, blowing up. All right. Next thing. So cricket at the Crossroads. Ben Stokes, World Cup champion, now Test captain of England, plays a knock that will go down in history from the 2019 World Cup final, and then a year out of defending the title, just retires. I mean, I wish Aaron Finch would take a leaf out of his book, but he'll soldier on, no doubt. Paul, you've sort of lamented a little bit about 50 over cricket, but I know you got a bit more to say.
Well, it's like the end of Neighbours. Not that I've ever watched an episode of Neighbours, but it's sad, it's nostalgic, I wish we were back in the 80s and 90s when the Tri Series was king and it was fantastic. We're not. It's not. It's over. One day cricket, it's got to go. And I just, for me, there's been a gradual drop in my interest over the years. But this series against Sri Lanka, I watched every ball of the Test matches. I watched a lot of the T20. Life got in the way. I would have watched the T20 if life hadn't got in the way. The first night of the first one-dayer, I didn't have anything else on, and I was idly looking at YouTube videos. I just couldn't bring myself to watch it because I just thought, oh. And I sent out a facetious tweet the other day. Suggestion to improve T20 cricket. Add 30 overs to each innings where they can score 180 singles. That's what one-day cricket kind of is. That as much as they've improved it by having the fourth fielder, only 4 fielders outside the power play before the 40th over, there are still too many balls where the bowler's running into bowl thinking, you know what, I'd love a wicket, I'd love a dot ball, but if he scores a single, well, so be it. And the batter's thinking, I'd love to hit a 6, I'd love to hit a 4, but happy to push a single. There's a stalemate. And, after the 10th over, you think, oh, God, there's 30 overs of this now coming up. So World Cups, as I said earlier in the show, Warnie's suggestion, keep it for World Cups. I'd keep the Champions Trophy. I still find 50-over cricket entertaining when it really matters. If I really want Australia to win, then I don't mind them scoring those 5-6 runs and over because it's important. They're building the platform. But when it's a bilateral series that even the players involved won't remember tomorrow who won, then, yeah, I think its time has come. And Ben Stokes is, I think he's probably made the right decision.
I wouldn't read, and I completely agree with you, Paul. Having said that, though, I did cover the last 3 ODIs of that Sri Lanka series. I was in Colombo, and they were actually some of the better 50-over matches I've seen in a long time. So maybe you missed out on something. Even though, like I wrote in my preview, the points didn't matter. I mean, it was not even part of the Super League, so it was bizarre. Covering a 5-match series where none of the matches mattered in the bigger scheme of things. I mean, because of what was happening in Sri Lanka and 60,000 people at the stadium, and especially that last game where they all came dressed in, or most of them came dressed up in yellow. There was a lot more.
That was wonderful, yeah.
It was amazing. But even the cricket, I thought was pretty good during the one day. It set up the Test series quite nicely. But I completely agree with you. I mean, the relevance of 50-over cricket has dwindled. They've tried everything they can. I mean, I think it's the most bastardized format in sport, one-day cricket. What have they not tried in the last 25 years, or in fact 30 years, from the 15-over rule to the power plays to super subs to everything under the sun? But for some reason, they've just not found a way. And T20 cricket or whatever it is, it's just taken off. I mean, it's taken the sheen of one-day cricket. The Super League was put in place so that everybody plays everybody else. And unless you really want to get excited about it, it is difficult to get excited about 50-over cricket in a bilateral form. But you still need a smattering of it, I guess, in between World Cups. So maybe what we were saying earlier, maybe the marquee one-day series might still stand, I guess, moving forward. India and Australia, when they play, even if it's a 3-match series, people will watch. Maybe, I don't even know whether Australia-England one-day series gain that kind of attention. We will wait and watch. It's going to happen at some point, I guess, very soon. But yeah, but I think Ben Stokes, though, you just look at the last 12 months, right? He takes a break for mental health. He comes to the Ashes, looked very refreshed, was almost the leader off the field. You could see, I remember him in that first warm-up game they played in Brisbane at the Ian Healy Oval. He was so pumped up. He was so happy to be back at the terrible Ashes. And now he finally has something to really hang his hat on, Test captaincy. And, I hate the term baseball, but, they seem to be on the cusp of something interesting, England as a team, as a Test team. So he's got something to really get excited about. One-day cricket, like you said, Manners, he's already won a World Cup. The next World Cup's in India.
Well, why doesn't he retire from the IPL for next year? So, I'll sit out the IPL and play the World Cup instead. And
he sat out the IPL this year. I mean, play Test cricket, he sat out the IPL this year.
So that's what I'm saying. Will he sit it out next year as well? I mean, because then he's kind of choosing one over the other. My thing is, Barrett, in India now, does the average fan care about India winning the 50-over World Cup, or do they care more about, say, their local IPL team lifting the IPL? I mean, what's more important?
That's the difference. In India always matters more than any of these IPL franchises.
Well,
Yes,
that's going to keep the World Cup going then, because that's all you
absolutely, yeah.
need.
No, definitely. I mean, that's why they made it a 10-team tournament, right? So that India plays 9 times at least, and then whether they qualify for the semis or not after 2007. So no, I think India above any IPL franchise, and I don't think that'll ever change. I mean, similarly, I mean, the Ashes above any Big Bash or 100 or whatever, right? People will still tune in and watch the Ashes. They'll barrack for England, Australia, whoever, wherever you come from. So that is never going to change, especially in India, because I don't know enough people who really have bought into their IPL team to that extent where it matters more than what Virat Kohli. I mean, even during the IPL, I'm on all these shows where they're only talking about Virat Kohli's form in relation not just to RCB, but more so about what will happen when the World Cup comes around. So that's never going to change.
That's
Manners, Barrett, you've given me an idea. What a wonderful night it would be to have a trivia competition exclusively on the playing conditions as they've evolved in one-day cricket since it began.
Please,
that would be fun.
Can you tell me? Even me, who is obsessed with cricket, have to work out. Okay, 4 fielders then, 5 fielders then. All right, couple more things. We're running out of time. So another bit of cricket news: Justin Langer, unceremoniously punted from the Australian coaching position, but he's been welcomed with open arms to the Channel 7 commentary box. So Justin Langer into the box. I don't think I've heard him do much cricket commentary. I'm not expecting a lot. It'll be, full of platitudes and enthusiasm. What about you, Paul? What are you expecting?
I think, sadly, I'm similar to you. And I think he could actually be very good if they actually sat him down and said, listen, you're going to be talking to people who actually know a fair bit about the game, who watch it. It's a lot. Your insight is maybe not as much as you think it is because you've spent all your time hitting a ball with a stick. How could you possibly know anything about cricket? So you've got to use your strengths. Talk about what it's like when you're actually batting. Talk about the unique insight that he can give. Don't fall into the sort of the trap of just Australia really won a wicket today.
Heaven forbid someone mentions Steve Waugh and then he's just off. I'm
happy with that. I think that some of the times when they get the new players that they don't give them the training that they should get. They need a bit of commentary training because they sometimes just look at it as, this is pretty easy compared to playing. And they spout out all this boring stuff. And you look at it and think, I'm going to have to mute you. And I fear that I'm going to have to mute Langer. And I hope I don't have to.
What do you think, Barry? You looking forward to him?
I am. I mean, I always enjoyed his press conference. I won't give you a Langer impression, but I generally, when I talk about Justin Langer, I turn into Justin Langer, but I won't. But here, I'm very tempted to. But no, I think, look, he brings he is a unique man. Look, he kind of things he talks about, the analogies he uses, the kind of books he quotes from. He is different to most other cricketers I've come across.
He's a legend too.
Of course, and I think it'll depend a lot on who's going to do commentary with him and what Channel 7 want out of him. I mean, is his job to sit there and talk about what is happening in the dressing room, bring out that, because he was in the dressing room, in an unhappy dressing room, as we now know. So are they almost going to use him as a hate piece, where he talks?
Of course they will.
Yeah, of course they will. I mean, exactly, but obviously in as subtle a form as possible, I guess. He's not obviously going to sit there and criticize players. Or who knows? Maybe he will. I don't know. That's how they bring some TRPs to them. Who knows? So it'll be interesting how whoever is going to do commentary. Of course, he's not going to be a caller. He's going to be the color commentator. If they put him with Ricky Ponting, because these days there are three-man teams, as we've noticed, or 3-person teams. I think every time, and I won't be surprised if that happens, every time he's in there, he's in there with Ricky Ponting, because there's also the possibility of him doing commentary with Hayden. That's going to be quite interesting. I mean, Hayden and Langer together in a commentary box, well, there's going to be a lot of brotherly love on display there. So I'm looking forward to it just because it's different. We don't know what he's going to be like in a commentary box. And, for all our Indian viewers, they'll remember Navjot Singh Sidhu. I mean, I remember watching him as a kid, seeing some of his post-match presentations. Nobody thought he would turn into the maverick he did. So people can are different when you put a mic in front of them, especially in the commentary box. But I am still expecting a version of what I've seen a lot of Justin Langer in press conferences, which is
I think if harnessed properly, he could be good. I just fear that they might do what they did with Brian Lara and got him a couple last season, and basically he didn't want to be there and just kind of dialed it in. A well harnessed Langer could be good. I just I'm slightly skeptical.
I think it'll be more from Langer. It'll be more like stories and quotes and anyway. All right, next bit of cricket news. All right, well, just really quickly, the Australian women's team is doing very well in the Commonwealth Games. They're 2 from 2. This will date very quickly, but fingers crossed they can bring home the gold medal, unlike the men's team in 1998 that came home with silver. But last bit of news. History was made 2 weeks ago when Sam Northeast scored 410 not out for Glamorgan. It's the 9th highest first-class score ever. And, this to me was why I love the fact that most games are streamed now. I saw him go past 300 and I got the stream going and it was really good quality stream and you could watch it. In days past, you would never see something like that. You would just read it in the paper. So just incredible. 410 not out. He put on like over 400 with the guy. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's you were sending me messages, and I was kind of glad that he didn't break a record because I didn't actually tune in to watch it. But it's always amazing when anyone gets 300, let alone 400. But as I said in the notes, I'm still angry at Alan Kippax declaring on Bradman in 1929-30 when he scored 452 not out in the second innings. Queensland got bowled out. I just checked the scorecard for 84 then, and there was plenty of time left over. New South Wales won by 685 runs. Bradman could have gone on and got 1,000. And as I said, I think the ICC should retrospectively deem that Kippax didn't declare and credit him with 1,000 not out, and that would be appropriate. But yeah, must have been a pretty flat pitch though for Northeast. Hey,
not flat enough for Michael Neser to then win them the game. That's all I know about that game. Hashtag Neser must play, man, as I had to slip that in.
It wasn't great bowling at times, and there's a bit of one-day feel about it. But 2 things. The captain asked Northeast whether he wanted to go for Lara's record, but instead they didn't. They went for the team win, which they got. So he's a good team man, Northeast. The coach left it up to him.
He should have gone for the record.
Well, you mentioned Alan Kippax. Remember a couple of years ago when Tim Payne declared when Warner was 335 not out, and his bat looked as as wide as ever. He could have made 500. So there's a bit of a history of that recently.
But especially, I mean, Sam Northeast, this is going to be the biggest thing he ever does in cricket. Not to disparage the county game, but like if he could have broken Lara's record, then that probably would have set him up for life financially. Like it would have been a life-changing moment. He should have said, bugger this, I want to get the record.
And it helps that when you have your own podcast, Sam Northeast, if I'm not mistaken, has his own podcast. So there you go, Menace. Maybe you should have him on yours. Like, imagine like...
No, I think you're making a cricket comeback. Maybe I'll go out.
Paul will declare on you, don't worry, when you get to 28.
Yeah. I'll do a Mitchell Stark and I'll just come off and like throw my bat across the change room. All right, so that was the cricket news. Let's get on to viewer mail and can't let it go very quickly. Rana Paveen has asked us, do we think that Tim David could make Australia's World Cup team? What do you think?
Well, this was my can't let it go, so I'll do it now. Okay. Do I think Tim David could make the side? I just bamboozled that there's even any debate. He is the number 1 player I pick in the side. He's the first. If Australia can only play 1 player in the World Cup, that's who I pick. Tim, it was great that Ricky Ponting wrote an article saying that he should be picked, but what kind of world are we living in where that article was needed to be written? Do we also need an article that says that aeroplanes are faster than ships? His record is just off the charts. He's so much better than everyone else. His T20 batting average is 33 at a strike rate of 165. No other Australian player goes close to those numbers. And if you say, oh, he's never done it at the international level, that's just a nonsense argument. Of course he could do it at the international level. And when someone says, oh, who should be dropped to make way for him, it doesn't matter. Pick him first, and then any of them. Pick him first and let the chips fall where they may, because he is the most likely person to win the World Cup for us. Like, he should be there should be absolutely zero doubt about his position in the side.
Well, we've got an answer to that, and Paul can't let it go. The next question is, secondly from Rana, should they pick Nathan Ellis for the World Cup, who has had a bizarre few weeks? I don't know if you saw, but in the T20 Blast final, he was bowling the last ball. I can't remember the team he was playing for, but he thought he'd won the T20 Blast for his team. And then they're all celebrating, and it was a no ball called from the umpire in the stands. So they had to clear all the fireworks and get everyone off the field and bowl the last ball. And luckily, Ellis still came up with the goods and they won. But that could have been very embarrassing. So Paul says no. What about you, Barrett?
Where does he fit in? Because I think Australia will have the same bowling attack as last time with Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood. Who I think is the best T20 bowler Australia has seen in a long time. And who would have thought that would even be a statement to make 2 or 3 years ago? And then you'll have maybe a Kane Richardson or someone else fitting into that fourth fast bowler slot. I think that's the only thing with Nathan Ellis. Where do you fit him in? And are we going to see an 18-member squad then? Why not? Why? He might be in the reserves, but yeah.
Yeah, he's a good player, but I wouldn't thought he'd even come into calculations for the squad.
Yeah, well, I mean, Rana says that Stark and Hazelwood's death bowling was pretty poor in the UAE, but I disagree. I think Hazelwood's probably our best T20 bowler at the moment, and Stark second.
Absolutely. Hazelwood's T20 bowling has really gone off the line.
All right, Barrett, do you have a can't let it go? That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to Alex Carey?
And Alex Carey would take it. He's had a very good tour of Sri Lanka behind the stumps. Yes, a couple of stumpings here and there, but both in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. I have to talk about my fellow South Australian, but my can't miss it was just some bizarre news coming out from the Caribbean that because the tour, the T20s were supposed to be the first two in the West Indies, the last 3 in Florida, but with literally 4 days or 5 days to go for the US leg, both the Indian players and a lot of the West Indian players don't have their US visas. So they might have to kind of keep the second half of the T20 series in West Indies. And as someone who has waited long periods to get that US visa, I'm not personally surprised that has happened, but wouldn't you have sorted the visa situation out before you went there? I just found it to be really bizarre. So that really caught my eye, and it's just come out today.
I've been such thralled to the BCCI. I just assumed that the BCCI could order the US government around.
Yeah.
That's the
what's Joe Biden doing? Yeah, I know.
Anyway, the IPL is the second biggest sporting comp in the world. Anyway, my can't let it go. I've got 2. The first one is the passing of Laurie Saul, who was a former first-class player from Western Australia, who was also a selector in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up watching a lot of cricket, and he sort of put that sort of golden generation team together, or the early stages. So rest in peace, Laurie Saul. And then in great news, the 100 starts this week. So we're back into some big time. I mean, this is the test for the 100 for me. It was very much affected by COVID last year. A lot of players couldn't get there. This to me is the real start of it. And Wade Watch is back in full swing. I'll be watching Matthew Wade turn out for the Birmingham Phoenix, but Maxi, Inglis, I mean, all the stars are over there. So the 100 starts this week, and also can't let it go. I mean, that Test match, England v India, a year later, in England able to win an incredible chase and square a series a year later, incredible. Different coaches, different teams, but the series ends a draw.
It was incredible, and Barrett mentioned it earlier in the show, but the England Test side is building something. I'm really intrigued by the upcoming series against South Africa. That's to see. I just, as someone who hates draws, I love the way that they play, and I can't wait to see them play again.
Yeah. I was listening to the BBC. You know, it just shows it's working up. Our friend Gav Josh many times was on Jonathan Agnew on BBC Test Match Special. So good on Gav going and covering that Test match when no one else was there. And yeah, he was on with Jonathan Agnew and a few other of the bigwigs. So well done, Gav.
Wow, that's fantastic. You broke up for me, Brett. So Gav Josh was on Test Match Special.
Yeah, he was. So he went and covered the England-India game, that final Test match. No one went, not even Barrett went, and that's a big sign that not a lot of people there. And and yeah, so he was on one of the daily wraps with Aggers and a few other people.
Oh, that's fantastic!
Yeah,
congratulations, Gav.
I mean, it's all thanks to Cricket Unfiltered, of course.
Yes, we gave him his launching pad.
You made him a star.
I did. All right, guys. Well, thanks everybody for listening to Cricket Unfiltered. Barrett, thanks for joining. It's great to have your insights. And yeah, we'll catch up soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. Thanks, Barrett. Thanks, Manners.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. And we'll be back next week. We're back into it. So see you then.